Thanks very much, Pete. It's a real pleasure to take part in the discussion forum in this PDSA's centenary year and be able to take a moment just before I start properly to thank AWF and very many of you in the room for your support and the collaborative working that we hugely benefit from. Whilst PDSA remains likely the largest charitable veterinary service of its kind in the world, providing an essential safety net for animals when their owners' financial circumstances change, we remain as motivated and active as ever in trying to make sure that people acquire pets, companion animals, that are well matched to their lifestyle and circumstances in the first place. And that's a necessary step towards fulfilling our side of the ethical bargain that we strike with our companion animals. That being that in return for the very meaningful companionship and enjoyment that millions of them bring to millions of us, we provide for their good quality of life. There are different ways of thinking about that, but we're familiar with the approach enshrined in the UK Animal Welfare Acts. So the provision for them of a suitable living environment, a suitable diet, to be able to behave in ways that are important to them, to have appropriate companionship depending on their species, and to be protected from pain, suffering, injury, and disease. But we also know, not least from PDSA's Animal Wellbeing Report, the annual National Assessment of Companion Animal Wellbeing in the UK, the 2018 edition has just been published today, that very many companion animals frequently don't have all of those needs met all of the time. And to give some familiar examples and not wanting to fall into the trap of unhelpfully perpetuating social norms, 20% are still fed harmful, 20% of rabbits are still fed harmful muesli. Of course, a wonderful 80% aren't. 54% are still living alone. In dogs, the rise of brachycephalics. I could, of course, have picked obesity as a poster boy here, and bearing in mind that brachycephaly also affects cats and rabbits. And 43% of cats living in multi-cat households, and the risk factors that we know that brings for their chronic stress-related disease. And in 19% of cases, owners actually have identified that they don't get along. And they're just the ones that are identified that way, perhaps through active signs of aggression or similar. And those examples, of course, are bad for the animal's welfare per se and their quality of life. They're harmful. And they may also be implicated, as in some cases, as reasons for relinquishment to the tune of 250,000 cats and dogs per year entering rehoming centres, around an estimated 60 to 70,000 rabbits per year. And if we just have a look at rabbits, Claire Ellis and colleagues last year looked at some of the reasons why rabbits are relinquished into rehoming centres. And in a vast majority of cases, so-called human factors and human reasons were identified, these being something about the guardian's lifestyle or circumstances that precluded ongoing ownership. So, for example, the child for whom they were often bought for as a pet are no longer interested, or they came to cost more than was originally expected. So it would seem, certainly to me and to us at PDSA, that lack of adequate pre-purchase preparation is an important root cause problem of many of the companion animal health and welfare problems that we're all familiar with, and that trying to tackle that problem might be something of a holy grail of fixing a lot of the issues that darken our door, but that we're keen to help with. So how could we do that? Well, legislation could play a role. So in Switzerland and parts of Germany, I believe, mandatory pre-purchase testing has been a feature of the landscape for some years. Perhaps some of the changes coming in to UK legislation later this year in the autumn with the animal establishment licensing regulations could help. Online tools can be beneficial. PDSA has a Get Petwise quiz, an online pet selector tool, There are others being developed by BSAVA, BVZS, and some of the industry bodies, particularly looking at how we might improve the online pre-purchase journey ahead of acquiring exotic pets, non-traditional companion animals. And these could all help, but they also have some disadvantages. They can be quite blunt instruments. At best, we can hope to help intervene in that pre-purchase journey and provide some signposting or prompt some relevant considerations, but they're not so tailored as we might like them to be to individuals. So what if, as many of us have dreamed before, some people, in thinking about taking on a companion animal as a new member of the family, thought to take the trouble to visit their local veterinary practice and have a chat with a veterinary professional. And Claire Ellis, in her paper, alluded to that in the discussion, thinking about rabbit relinquishment. She proposed that perhaps veterinarians could offer pre-adoption counselling to potential new guardians of pets. And she's certainly not alone in having that idea. So some well-known members of the profession to us, John Chitty, who was last year's BSAVA president, said vets are well placed to educate owners who ask for advice when considering acquiring a pet, helping to ensure they can provide for their welfare needs before taking on the responsibility. However, many do not seek such advice, which is a concern. And the theme picked up again by Robin Hargreaves, who was presenting earlier on the panel earlier this year. He said, new owners have never really taken pre-purchase advice from the profession, and unfortunately I haven't seen that changing recently, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep trying. And that's certainly a sentiment that PDSA would strongly endorse. And hopefully I can give you some encouragement or optimism to think about why we might continue trying. Are people likely to move away from their laptop if they even take the trouble to do that level of pre-purchase research to actually come to a veterinary practice? So with apologies to those who've heard this personal anecdote of mine before, there was a family that is well known to me. They were looking to get a first pet for their 7-year-old daughter. And because they knew of my interest and my career, they wanted to keep me abreast of how things were going. And it struck me that they made at least 2 or 3 visits to their local garden centre to ask for advice about what might be the right pet for them. And I was just amazed that curious that each time they did that, they drove past where I knew the local veterinary practice was. And eventually, once they'd made their choice and we were chatting again, I said to them, would you have thought, or did you ever think to go into the practice to have any of those chats? And they just said, absolutely not. We wouldn't have thought about that at all. It's the first place we'd go in a flash if any of them got sick or injured. But not only had we not thought about it, but now, being encouraged to think about it, we would have felt we were bothering busy people who wouldn't be set up to have a conversation like that with us. That was their perception. So this year's PAW report, we've partnered with both BVA and the British Veterinary Nursing Association, BVNA, to ask some focus questions of relevance to the profession. And one of those areas was pre-purchase. So what do we know now about the level to which the profession is attempting to position itself as providers of pre-purchase information? We found that 13% offer free dedicated pre-purchase clinics. A further 2% offer paid-for dedicated pre-purchase clinics. And of those offering free pre-purchase clinics, vets and vet nurses estimated that 71% of potential pet owners who are not existing clients of the practice go on to join the practice after receiving the consultation. And then just to stick with a couple more stats from this year's report, which is free to download online. Of vets and vet nurses working in practices which don't offer pre-purchase consultations, just about half said that the practice hadn't considered offering this service. 90% though said it was something that they would consider offering. And in just under a third of cases, they said that a consultation framework to help them have that discussion would assist. So one of PDSA's approaches in working towards our vision of a life of well-being for every pet is to try to innovate and take novel practice-based journeys, new approaches, novel practice-based approaches to the problems that we're concerned about. So in this case, we have constructed a pre-purchase consultation framework, which we would never say was the be-all and end-all, but just to offer something for further discussion or adaptation as people see fit. And I'll come on to the framework itself in the next slide, but just so that you know what sits around it by way of a resource package, there's an e-learning module which tells you a bit about it and can help vets and vet nurses or whoever might be able to administer the consultations in the practice. There are some supporting booklets for both the client and the veterinary team, and they've been scrutinised by BVA's policy committee and now carry the BVA logo, so we have BVA endorsement for those. And we also have a practice poster that you can use to advertise the service and, of course, fill in the details of your own practice on it. And the framework itself, we've divided it into two parts, a game of two halves. So the first are questions about your lifestyle and circumstances around this PETS acronym, place, exercise, time and spend, and that kind of creates a short list of species and perhaps breeds that may be suitable for you. They're fairly self-explanatory. How suitable is the place where you live for a pet? Are you in a high-rise? Do you have local green space? How much exercise are you able and willing to do with a pet? How much time do you have and are you willing to commit to caring for them, whether that's walking them or grooming them or training them or whatever? And importantly, how much are you able to spend on them? And do you have a realistic awareness of likely monthly and annual costs? And then from that list of the potential ones, you might say, well, I'm interested in rabbits, say, and that would then prompt a conversation about, well, do you know what the 5 welfare needs of rabbits are and how you might meet them? You could talk about hay, that they have a very large accommodation with a attached exercise area, and so on and so forth. And we would also include in there some thoughts about sourcing, helping you to avoid puppy farms or whatever. And all that's freely available at pdsa.org.uk/whichpet. So that's the nuts and bolts of our offering and something that we're essentially now able to share with the profession. Just to give another window on the possible direction of travel and whether we're likely to see more of this in the coming months and years. And I know Steph's going to pick up the ball. This is a screen grab from the website of one of the well-known large veterinary practice groups, Independent Vet Care, IVC. And they're offering free advice clinics to make sure you choose the perfect pet. That's in some of an increasing number of their participating practices. They're free, and they have a pre-purchase champion at the practice who's undergone some web-based training to fulfil the role. So hopefully this is something that we'll see more of. To my mind, the next steps really are around ambition. If we don't want people to walk past the surgery door and go to the garden centre, and we would welcome the opportunity to talk to them, then essentially we have to set out our stall, reposition what a vet practice is in the minds of potential owners, and that's likely not only to bring animal welfare benefits, but be a sound commercial proposition as well. Thank you very much.